say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining from. We are very pleased to have you here with us for this webinar on the digital dimension, the way forward. So IAU is holding this global webinar series every Tuesday, and we come together and discuss different topics on higher education, from leadership to internationalization. We're looking at how higher education is contributing to sustainable development, among others. And today, what we're going to look at is more the dimension of technology and how it changes higher education. My name is Trine Jensen, and I lead the work on higher education and technology here at the International Association of Universities. And before we start, I just want to mention two initiatives that we have launched this year. First of all, we launched a report that we call The Current State of Digital Transformation in Higher Education, which was based on a global survey conducted in 2019. But what we did not know when we launched this report in January this year was what was going to happen just a few months after, and to what extent that the disruptions of this pandemic has pushed forward digital transformation in higher education. So although our report is somehow outdated, it's also going to be a very interesting baseline in order to see how things are going to change over the next years. The second initiative that I wanted to mention is IAU is developing a new policy statement on the digital transformation on higher education. And here, what we're trying to do is kind of to outline what are the key values and principles that we believe can find global breeding ground and that must underpin the digital transformation so that we shape the digital future that we want. It is right now open for a member consultation, so all members listening in, you're very welcome to provide your comments on the statement. The final version of the statement will be presented for endorsement at the IAU General Conference, which is to take place in October next year. But we are very pleased now to turn to this second edition of webinars looking specifically at the digital dimension. In the last session, we were looking at complementarity between different modes of learning, between purely online education, blended modes, and more traditional face-to-face. And we had three different higher education institutions with us sharing their experience. Well, this time we're going to go about it a bit differently. We have invited two excellent speakers to join us today who have accepted to provide their view on the future of higher education. Both of them have been advocating for change in teaching and learning way before the pandemic. So we thought this was a good opportunity to come together and start discussing what are the opportunities that we can actually take out of this moment, of course, of crisis, of disruption. What are the opportunities that we can then build on and try to imagine maybe a better future for higher education and for teaching and learning. So what we're going to do is that we're going to listen to each of our two panelists, and then we will move to a question and answer session. So please, the audience, you're very welcome to post your questions in the chat, and we will try to pick up some of your questions once we have had the chance to listen to our speakers. So I think that we will move ahead, and I will start by introducing our first speaker, Jose Bowen, who has been leading innovation and change for over 35 years in different universities: Stanford University, Georgetown University, University of Southampton in the UK, back in the US, in Miami University, SMU, and lastly as president of Goucher College until last year. He now runs Bowen Innovation Group, and he does consultancy on innovation, leadership, pedagogy, diversity, and inclusion, among others. He's also a senior fellow at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Some years back, Jose, you published a book called Teaching Naked, how moving technology out of the college classroom will increase student learning. So I think that we look very much forward to hearing your thoughts about teaching and learning in the future. So you have the floor. I will stop sharing the screen here so you can go ahead and share your screen. And we look forward to hearing your views.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to assume that if you can't hear me, somebody will give me a big thumbs down. But I'm very glad to be here this morning with you and with Sharon, and who I'm sure we're both going to talk about the opportunities and the challenges for equity in this new era. That technology has great promise, but I think we all understand that higher education is an enormously inequitable place, and that not everybody has equal access or gets equal opportunity. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about how we can fix some of that. And I think technology can be a tool for that. But we start first by thinking about how technology has changed the environment in which we work. And so I always start by remembering that technology has fundamentally changed our relationship to knowledge. When I grew up, there were these things called encyclopedias, if you remember those. And so knowledge was relatively scarce, but it was also relatively reliable, right? That if you found the encyclopedia, you had some assurance that there had been an editor, someone had done something. It wasn't perfect, but there were no cat videos in the encyclopedia. And so now we have the opposite situation. Now we have a situation where knowledge is abundant, it's everywhere, we have easy access, but it's relatively unreliable. And that certainly changes what we do in the classroom. It has to change the meaning of the word professor, because that fundamental, you come here because I have the knowledge and nobody else has the knowledge, has changed. And so I think human beings are fundamentally confused about this. We're so confused that we call this a smartphone, because this device has access to all of that incomplete information that's often unreliable. But smart is not the person or the device that knows the most. Smart is the ability to change your mind. And so I think our access to more information means we have to rethink what it means to be educated, which in my mind means that it's more important than ever to be able to sort through the fake news, the inauthentic, what is reliable, what is important, what is relevant. And so our relationship to knowledge has changed, and this is reflected in multiple employer surveys. Problem solving, ability to work with diverse people is at the very top of this list. Critical thinking. Skills are still on the list, but they're further down the list. And partly that's because the skills that you need are going to change. So surely a computer science degree in this age or a cybersecurity degree is useful. But a computer science degree is 4 years old by the time you get it. It's basically a degree in the iPhone 1, right? Which is it's nothing, it's important, but it's only as important as your ability to learn how to use the iPhone 12 or your ability to adapt and to learn new things. So whatever we can teach students, whatever content we give them, they're going to have to be able to learn new things on their own. And so I think of the future as being a learning economy where the primary value of our graduates is not what they know, but what they can learn for themselves. I always think that the job of a teacher is to make herself obsolete, right? So that you no longer need to come back and get information from us, that you can find new things on your own and surpass us. So the curriculum of the future has to be designed to prepare students for the unknown. And so in that way, it's really more about process than content, right? We have traditionally focused on what is the content, what are the things that students need to know for this future. And that's important. If you're starving, fish is useful. But really our job is to help students teach them to fish for themselves. Because learning is fundamentally about change, and change is hard. Changing your mind is the hardest thing you do. But as technology and knowledge continues to proliferate at a rapid rate, the ability to say, there's new information, I have to change the way I was doing things, I have to rethink my assumptions, becomes ever more important. And that we often forget that that's the hardest piece of learning. So I'd like us to focus more in the future on an education that is focused more on process, on making ourselves obsolete, and on preparing students for the unknown. So it's less focused on content, it's more focused on process. So if the old 3 R's were about, in the US, reading, writing, and arithmetic, despite not all being R's really, the new 3 R's are, and those were content-focused 3 R's, right? The 3 things people needed to know. There's still content that is important. We are not abandoning content. But my new 3 R's are about relationships, resilience, and reflection. They are a means to help students learn to change their mind on their own. It's also the case that we know much more about cognitive science and how learning happens, and relationships are fundamental. That you only learn if you trust the source, right? The reason facts are having such a difficult time in our current era is because people have access to all sorts of other information, and it turns out that their ability to evaluate the facts on their substance is actually limited cognitively because we trust the source or we don't trust the source. The first person who speaks in a room has more power because they determine what we then think is normal, or whether we think, oh, maybe they agree with us, maybe they don't. Oh, I was right, yay! And so I get more confidence. So relationships and community absolutely are fundamental to all learning. But resilience in how we deal with failure, and fundamentally reflection, our ability to change our mind and say, I was wrong, and I have to rethink my assumptions, not just take this new piece of information and keep using it in the old way. So that's the first point. The second is that technology has also changed social proximity. And what that means, right? The meaning of friends. I don't think I have to belabor this point. I think we all understand that virtually we can do things we couldn't used to do, and we feel like we're connected in ways. And students certainly feel this way. And I'll give you 2 examples for how we might think about this in this new world, given that I said relationships matter, and given that I've written a whole book on the importance of face-to-face. So there are new opportunities for community, and I'm going to give you 2 opposite examples. One is the Mormon University, Brigham Young University in Idaho in America. When they set up their online programs, they realized that they had churches throughout the globe. And so they used their local churches in all of their places to have study groups once a week. So you can be taking whatever class you want. There's this efficiency of online, of course, but they still offer the ability to gather together, which creates a different kind of community, even though people might be taking other courses. And so they've used this actually for the church as well as for their classrooms. On the other hand, on the other extreme, are lots of places that are saying, now that we're virtual during this pandemic, and that's taught us to use these tools, we need to have partnerships with universities across the world, so that my students aren't only sitting in a class with other students from Spain or other students from Indiana, that in fact we could merge those courses and have our Introduction to Calculus course be bilingual, or be between 2 countries that speak the same language, but in different parts of the world. And so there are new opportunities to build community thanks to how we think about social media and how we use technology. My point at the bottom is that technology is a tool, not a strategy. So chalk is a technology, right? But more chalk is not more learning. And so for technology, the real question is when we use it, how we use it. And so there are lots of different ways to use this technology. So the third point about how technology has changed us is that it's changed how we think about customization and gaming. And for those of you who are not video gamers, I'm actually not, but I recognize that that video games have fundamentally changed how people learn, right? They didn't set out to say, we're going to create a learning platform, but a game is only as good as your engagement, right? If you don't stay engaged with the game and you leave to go do something else, the game is not a very good game. So games do this by being customized, right? So if the game is too hard, it gets easier. If it's too easy, it gets harder. But it does this for millions of people simultaneously. So I can be on level 5 because I'm no good, but you're on level 5,000 because you're really good. So it finds the place that the gamers call pleasantly frustrating. So every person who's using the game is pleasantly frustrated at the same time, right? And that is exactly what we want classrooms to be like. So video games are customized for everybody, so everybody is engaged all at once. And so we've got to take advantage of this because this is also, frankly, the norm, right? Our young people today are used to this. And so they've experienced games in America. They've played more hours of video games than they have gone to school by the time they come to college. And this is called the epic win phase, right? If all of our students looked like this, teaching would be easy because this is a student who's clearly engaged, but she's also got that combination of urgency, right? She's focused. What matters right now is important. There's also optimism, though, right? That she could win, right? That something good could happen. And so I think that in the future, can we design a university to be more like a good video game, right? To be engaging and customized for every person. So technology has some opportunities here. It's not going to happen automatically, but I think there are certainly opportunities for us. So my slide got a little altered, but my other point about learning is that learning is sweet, right? I've been talking about how learning is about change, but it's also about the 5 conditions that actually matter most: sleep, water, exercise, eating, and time. And here again, right, is an equity condition for learning. Notice that T is not for teaching. That time on task actually matters more. Teaching is the next thing, surely. But if students are asleep, if they're thirsty, right, and your brain needs literally the water. So, right, my coffee first thing in the morning is not the right thing. Right, my brain is dehydrated in the morning. But literally, when you haven't had enough sleep, you don't create memories in the same way. But also, right, your fear response is elevated, right? That you're not able to tell friend or foe as easily. In fact, if you get 7 hours of sleep and I show you the 36 different emotions of faces, right, when you get 8 hours of sleep, you can identify 35 out of 36. You do pretty well. But after 7 hours of sleep, it goes to almost zero. Right, that everybody's out to get me, right? Your fear response is much greater. And that's a fundamental condition that works against learning. So learning is sweet. And as we design the learning of the future, we need to think not only about the digital, but about the basic biology of what's going on with people. So when I think about how we can use technology in the future, I remember these 2 aspects, right? On the one hand, there is design on the right here, that technology can help us with design. It can help us with things, or it could not. But teaching is about design. What are we going to have students do? When are we going to have them do it? Did we provide the right scaffolding? Are we giving feedback in the right way? But there's always a human element. Students learn more when you care about them, or when they perceive that teachers or the system cares about them. Students learn more when they have clear communication and flexibility, and they feel taken care of personally. I think on the right, the big challenge is going to be integration, right? That we often think of our courses as isolated pods of knowledge, but the internet's made that less relevant, right? I can get a video, a TED Talk, anywhere about anything. So we have to think more about integrating the various pieces for students to help them, again, ultimately learn to change. And so one example of this is that I'm going to get a little technical for a minute. So, right, at the moment we have all of these, delivery issues, what places are calling the high flex or campus flex. Everybody has a different name for it. But it's what I would call emergency remote teaching, right? It's not really online teaching. But it's run into a problem that a lot of online teaching happens, right? So if you've got the 3 circles, or that may be 3 classes of 30 or 3 classes of 3,000, to meet with them 9, 10, and 11 o'clock, which is what most face-to-face universities do, right? I'm going to repeat the lecture at 9, 10, and 11. That doesn't make much sense, right? Because you're coming in, students are getting the same lecture. This is kind of the old traditional model. So you could put all those students together in an asynchronous group, right? Record whatever video content you're going to use or use existing content, and then have smaller live groups right by the little circles on the far right, right? So that's an example of how technology gives us truly different ways to think about when do I do synchronous, when do I do asynchronous, when do I meet with students, and I still believe that the face-to-face is very, very important. So ultimately, right, the one who does the work does the learning, and so this is why I come back to SWEET, because what we're really trying to do is to create an environment where you will do the work. In this case, the push-ups, because watching someone else do push-ups is not that useful. Even if they're intellectual push-ups, right? Watching me do intellectual push-ups is not as good a learning tool as getting you to do the push-ups. So what I'm really trying to do in both my human and my design elements of teaching is to get you to do the work. And that work is ultimately the work of change, learning how to change your own mind. And so to me, this is an opportunity for rethinking a number of things. I'll give you just one example, which is the scaffolding here. So this is a study scaffolding, right? So normally we say, come back in a week or come back in a few days. Turns out that students, right, don't know what to do at that time when you say do the problem set, write a paper. And so scaffolding is really important. And so this is one I'm giving it away on my website, teachingnaked.com. This is from my new book on the 3 R's, but it's there for free. And this is a template, so you customize this. But the research done at Stanford about helping students say, well, what are you going to do? Again, how many hours will you need? What grade do you want, et cetera, at the top. But then having students choose strategies, right? What resources are available, right? Could you study in groups? Could you go to a library? Do you study by yourself? Do you highlight in the book? What do you do? And it usually, I think it's helpful to help students understand, well, highlighting is not as good. This is better. Making analogies is better. But ultimately, if I let students do this for themselves and at the end of the week say, okay, what worked for you? What was good, right? That gives students an opportunity to reflect on their own learning. This is an example of how I would say I'm helping you do the work, right? I'm giving you a rubric for how the studying might work, and then having you say what was most effective, what helped you achieve your goals, and I do this every week, certainly around important assignments. And this research, this is I think amazing, right? So again, back to social media and social proximity. So this is from a process to get people to use less electricity. So this costs nothing. This is a zero cost intervention. This is from Sacramento in California. These are the new energy bills, right? So it says last month you used 63% more electricity than your neighbors. And there's a little chart here of what your neighbors did. And they are people with the same size house, et cetera. So your efficiency is below average. So what do you think happens if I say to people, you use more electricity than your neighbors? Well, what happens is that people start using less electricity, right? So the problem is, suppose you used, you used more electricity, you start using less. But if I say you use less electricity, people start using more, at least Americans do. They think, well, I didn't use enough. Unless they get this little emoji, this little smiley face, right? This is a perfect example of relationships, and right, the thumbs up or the smiley face. I can actually stop the effect by saying you used less energy. Good job. That is an enormously simple thing, a little emoji. So I'm trying to think about ways to help students do more studying on their own. And so these are nudges. And so my last point is that content still matters. What you think about, your content you're professing is still there. But really, we're designers, we're curators. And so my new title for professors is cognitive coach. Can we think about how we can help other people do the work? So I'll stop there and let Sharon take over, and we'll be back for questions at some point.
Thank you very much, Jose, for your inspiring talk and reminding us, of course, that technology is only a means to an end. So you need a strategy. You need to think about how you want to use this means for a specific purpose. And also giving us some examples of reminding us of the learning process, that the ultimate purpose is to allow the students to become learners and give them to path to be able to continue learning on their own. I will move on to the next speaker, and I'm very pleased to introduce Sharon McPherson. She's one of Africa's leading experts on the impact of technology on disruption for development, the future of work, and of education. Her passion is to help improve the lives of people in the developing world by helping leaders in emerging markets to harness the power of disruptive technologies to transform and create new opportunities. Sharon is a teacher. She's teaching project finance at the University of Cape Town at the Graduate School of Business in South Africa, but she's also a faculty member of Singularity University in Silicon Valley. She is furthermore also the co-founder and director of the Center for Disruptive Technologies. And as I already mentioned, she is an advocate for the disruption of traditional education systems that are failing to equip people with the knowledge and skills needed to thrive in an age of disruption. So I think this is a very brief introduction, Sharon, but we look very much forward to hearing your view on the opportunities for the future. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trine, and welcome everyone. Trine, you asked me to do a pitch, so I've structured my talk as a pitch. It's going to be lightning, so you've got to stay with me. And I'm going to do three things in this talk. We're going to talk about the uncomfortable truth, and that is that higher education was broken even before the COVID-19 crisis. So I want to impress upon all of our participants the need for us to build back better, you know. And then the second thing that I'm hoping to do is to raise your awareness around how technology is enabling the kind of transformation that we so desperately need in higher education. And then the third thing I'm going to do is tell you about some of the things that we're doing as founders of the Center for Disruptive Technologies and invite you to be part of that. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The uncomfortable truth is that we actually have not innovated really in terms of the fundamental structure of higher education, really since the first schools of higher learning were conceptualized, not in the West, but in the East, where people would travel from across the known world to sit at the feet of the imams or the people who were the gurus, the people who were the repositories of knowledge. And I want you to pay close attention to this oak here, who's busy, you know, he's probably traveled from far, but he's sleeping. And then when we look at the earlier universities in, or let's call them, because they weren't all universities, clearly, centers for higher learning in the West, as Jose rightfully mentioned, the church, you know, was and is a big player in higher education, but it was still very elite. You didn't see any women being educated and certainly not teaching, right? And you had to really be part of the upper class in order for you to participate in higher learning. And unfortunately, we still actually have problems of exclusivity and access to knowledge, and technology as an enabler is a great tool for democratizing access to learning. I teach at the University of Cape Town. I'm now an adjunct, woo woo. And this is still, I would like to say this is not my class, but you still find that students are having the same response as you saw sort of, you know, centuries ago. A lot of that has to do with the fact that what they're learning isn't relevant. Already, too many of our students in higher education actually know more about technology and what's happening with the fourth industrial revolution than the professors or the lecturers. South Africa is my adopted home. I've lived and worked in South Africa for the past 22 years. I'm locked out of South Africa at the moment. I'm hoping to get back there in the next month or so. But my heart broke because starting in 2015, we had a lot of riots, a lot of protests. Young people were toying in the street and really expressing their unhappiness around their inability to access higher education. So fees must fall was a protest. Many of you may have read about it or saw it on the news. People died during these protests. People died trying to get access to higher education, which in my opinion, much of which is not relevant. And so my heart was breaking because I saw people struggling to get access to learning during a time when in South Africa, at any given time, there are as many job openings in the South African economy as there are people coming out of high school, out of university. So, what is that saying about how our higher education system is preparing people for the world in which we were, world in which we were living in and living in? Because the fourth industrial revolution didn't stop just because the COVID-19 crisis, is upon us. This is back from 2016 Stats SA, and what you see is that in a country that is pretty diverse, the matriculation rates amongst Black and colored students in South Africa have been going down consistently, and it continues to decrease. And so what that is saying is that we need an ecosystem approach. There's certainly challenges in primary and in high school, and even if we lower the standards, so to speak, and let other folks in who may have come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, the fact of the matter is if we don't transform higher education, many of those people who have great skills, great dispositions, great competencies, because they've been out in the bush fighting a war for revolution, they know how to lead. But the fact of the matter is they haven't had access to the formal learning and the repositories of knowledge. And so quite often they get into tertiary institutions and they can't get out. So in South Africa, we have a tertiary system that can really accommodate, say, about 600,000 people. We have over 1 million students in that system, and at least 400,000 of those folks are not going to be able to get out. So we've got a real crisis in higher education. South Africa isn't alone, but is certainly part and parcel of my first message to you. And that is, this is happening not just in South Africa, all over the world. Higher education was broken, fundamentally broken prior to COVID-19. We have an opportunity with this crisis to change these stats, to build back better. It's not just about the technology, but technology is certainly an enabler. Some of the major challenges to higher education is that we're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we're still using a first industrial revolution way of accessing higher learning. Education and learning is not the same. I agree with you, Jose, on that one. I believe that the future of education is mass personalized learning. And I'll demonstrate a little bit why I think that. These are just some of the characteristics of higher education that we have inherited from the factory model that we created during the first industrial revolution. One of the things I also want you to pay attention to is that industrial revolutions are driven by technology, whether it's steam, electricity, the computer age. Now we're, according to Professor Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum, we're now into the second part of the computer age, which is the fourth industrial revolution. So, the lexicon is important, but I don't want us to get caught up in whether this is the 4IR or the 3RR. What I want you to know is that we've got a structural model which is completely outdated. It was conceptualized long, long ago. It was becoming increasingly irrelevant before COVID-19, and certainly the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic, in my opinion, has accelerated the rate of change across education, primary, secondary, tertiary, by a factor of 10. And many of us who are educators were ill-equipped to actually teach in the middle of a pandemic. Here's the news. This isn't going to be the last pandemic that we're likely to experience in our lifetime. We haven't even talked about the other things that will continue to disrupt education. Climate change, for example. How do you teach when we're having a hurricane or we've got fires raging out in California, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to continue to see a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. How are we preparing students to unleash their human potential and make a meaningful contribution to society? That's what I believe education is all about. And I think we were failing woefully even before this was the reality. Stay home. So we had teachers, leaders in education who had been resistant to the disruption that was happening as a result of ed tech investors, people like me who are educators, but who also are technologists. I am never going to tell you that technology is the solution to the crisis. I am going to always preach that human ingenuity coupled with the right strategy, coupled with technology as an enabler, is always going to be the winning formula. If you've got great human ingenuity and you've got a great strategy, but I come along with both of those things and technology as an enabler, I'm going to win every time. And we need to be positioning ourselves to win in terms of how do we pour into people so that they live better. And if education isn't about that, then I don't know what it's about. This is part of, now that's part one. It's broken. I am an activist, and this is about transformation. This conversation is not about reformation. It is fundamentally broken. And what needs to happen is we need to get together as transformation agents to say we are in a crisis situation. There was a break. What went before, and now we're here. And quite frankly, we really don't know all that's going to happen in the future, but we know that we're in this period. How do we build back better? I want you to land on that. I want you to leave this conversation with a personal responsibility to become a transformation agent. You cannot keep up with the changes that are happening in our society today. This is kind of a periodic table that we've started collaborating and building on with all of the technologies that are proliferating, whether you talk about knowledge, content, education, management, traditional models, new delivery methods. It is proliferating all over the world, and COVID-19 is accelerating the pace of change, which was already exponential and being driven by advancing technologies before the crisis. This is Neuralink. Many of you may have read in the press last month, Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink. Brain to machine interfaces are, I believe, one of the technologies that's going to really, really disrupt not just education, but learning, future learning, as we are kind of envisioning it today. Ultra fine threads have the capacity, ultra fine fibers have the capacity to thread into literally into synapses. And it's not today, we're looking at kind of one-way links. But what we're going to see in the future is science fiction becoming science fact. It sounds like, whoa, what's this lady talking about? And we look at things like The Matrix, where Trinity was able to download, information that helped her to fly a fighter, a helicopter. You look at things like I can't think of the name of the movie. I know you know the name of the movie. You can put it in the chat where, this guy is able to put this thing on his head and connect to so many people. X-Men, right? What's happening today, though, is we are able to use clumsy. We're still using EKG technologies, et cetera. It's probably going to be wireless before too long, but we are able to communicate brain to brain today. So when these technologies couple with things like Neuralink, which is a form of brain to machine interface, what I'm showing you here is brain to brain interface. It sounds like science fiction, but it's science fact, and it's happening today. So do yourselves a favor, set up your personal data queries on your browsers so that you can begin to study yourself, right? As educators, we need to be constantly, being educated, right? So understand what's happening in the world of technology. This is just one. When we start to look at things like brain to machine interfaces, brain to brain interfaces, and we couple those things with things like quantum computing, the Internet of Things, third platform technologies, it is mind-blowing, quite literally. And so we need to be thinking about, what does the future of education look like? And now is the time for us to be really getting serious about that, because we know that what went before wasn't working. And so in South Africa, I teach at the University of Cape Town, and this company, Get Smarter, grew out of the University of Cape Town's ecosystem. So I was substituting for these guys, and I went to the chancellor at the University of Cape Town and other folks, and I said, listen, we have an incredible opportunity to begin to be more cognizant of the amazing ideas that are coming out of our ecosystem. These guys are doing very cool things. It was just a MOOC, right? Get Smarter is just a MOOC, but it was an opportunity years ago for the university itself to support Get Smarter. Along comes 2U, which is a big American company, ed tech firm. They put in 123 million. They own Get Smarter, and the university loses again. So in addition to how we do things better, we need to be more collaborative within university ecosystems. We need to have less ego, and we need to not, be, this is my fiefdom, this is my area, and don't come over here, and understand that we actually don't know a lot about what the future of learning really looks like, and be open to exploring, how do we build back better. Also, we need to be better in the university system in terms of how we take the great game-changing ideas that keep bubbling up within our ecosystems and really take those out to the world. So there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of our structural models, our funding models, our business models. We are going to continue to see the rise of platforms, right? And you're going to continue to see platform businesses morph into ecosystem businesses within the education space. Why? Because there are questions around education's relevance, right? You have all of these segments in the education value chain, which are ripe for disruption. And I believe that if a robot can do your job, a robot should do your job, and then you should do something else, right? Because we're humans, we are resilient, we are adaptive, and we have genius. There's lots of things that we can do and should be doing, and this is not going to go away. Now, we can put our head in the sand and we can say, okay, great, and long for, yesteryear, but business as usual today means no business at all. And what we're finding across the world is that the funding models of most universities are under severe pressure. Why? Because the cost of higher education has been going like this, and the cost of real wages have been going like that and going like that. How can people afford it? Technology as an enabler is going to continue to enable the access to knowledge, right? And so we need to get on board and figure out how we're going to stay relevant. We're going to continue to see all of these things that are going to continue to transpire in our society, including the emerging role of teachers. One of the biggest challenges in terms of the transformation of education is that the gurus, who have been the repositories of power, themselves have become stagnant, lacking innovation. And as a result, people are going to just keep going around us. And I'm going to show you, and as I bring this to a close, how and why that probably is the right thing to happen if we ourselves are not willing to evolve. We have already seen and will continue to see the transference of power from educators and the educational institution to our clients, which are our students. The future of education is mass personalized learning. The learner is going to be at the center. And I believe that that's where the learner should be, at the center, with the stakeholders around the learner. It's not about me as the professor, and it's certainly not about the four walls of the institution. It is about learning that is socially embedded, that's contextualized, that's relevant, that's open wall, and where I, as the learner, have agency to go in and to get access to those things that matter to me. Do I believe in liberal arts and we need to study all kinds of things to become well-rounded human beings? Absolutely. And this isn't about that. It's about human ingenuity with the right strategy, with technology as an enabler. The power is already going away to the learner at the center, and that's going to continue to happen. What does it look like? We're going to go from reputation driven. Oh, I want to go to Oxford or Harvard or Leeds or wherever I'm going, Stanford, because it's got a great reputation and I'm going to give you all this money and my family's going to go into debt because I'm banking on the reputation in order to open some doors for me. That's already becoming a thing of the past. People are making decisions based on data. What do people do after they leave this institution of higher learning? Oh, I have access to that data. Let me educate myself around that. And if it's not looking good for me, I'm not going to go there, right? The future of higher education, one size fits all. Nah, that's not. We as the gurus no longer just get to decide this is what you need to know. This is all you need to know in this class. And this is what I'm going to give you. And then it's lockstep and I get to just repeat that and over and over again ad nauseum. We're going to morph from the one size fits all to just right education. As a matter of fact, I was a lawyer in a past life before I saw the light. And I helped to form the African Leadership Academy, which then grew to the African Leadership University. And they were one of the first universities in Africa where a person could say, I am interested in impacting the world this way. Can you help me? And then you had amazing thought leaders, gurus, educational experts come together to craft degrees around the learner based on what it is that they were inspired to go out and do in the world. And I think that that's fantastic. And we need to continue to support the transformation of higher education in that way. How are we going to go? We're going to go from 4-year college degrees to stackable credentials. Whether you like it or not, it's happening already. It's going to continue to happen. I want to go and work for Google. So what is it I need to do the engineering work that I want to do at Google? Oh, I need this, this, and this, and this, and this. I need a certification in this, and I need a little of that, and I need a little of that. And so for those of us who are real advocates of liberal arts and people studying all kinds of things to edify them, I'm not suggesting that the sole goal of education is to go out and get a job. But we've got to be in this conversation, helping to shape the future of higher education, as opposed to sitting out and saying, no, we want to do it the old-fashioned way. Okay, so what do people buy when they buy a degree from a tertiary institution? Because quite often we don't think of our students as clients, right? And so we don't spend a lot of time thinking about why are they in here? So knowledge acquisition, Jose talked a lot about knowledge acquisition, and most of what he said, I agreed with, and we'll have some time to stir the pot because there's some things that, maybe I've got a little different view, but knowledge acquisition, I mentioned already, for me, it's not just about knowledge, it's also about your knowledge state, as well as the skills and the dispositions, right? You can't teach somebody something that you don't have. You can't give someone something that you don't have. So if we ourselves as educators are not agile, resilient, adaptive, open to new experience, et cetera, how are we going to teach someone else to be that way? So the skills and the dispositions and the competencies are also part of what I think future learning is increasingly going to be about. Access to opportunities is part of what I pay for when I pay for a Harvard degree. The reputation, yeah, but I want to be part of the Harvard alumni network. I want access to the opportunities that come from that network. Cognitive and employable skills. Yeah, some of us want to go to school so we can go out and get a job and help feed our families. And we need to not judge that. And we need to give people what it is that they feel like they want to go out and make a contribution to society. Personal transformation. I have also written a book. The book that I wrote with my brother, who was also a doctor, is called From Gifts to Greatness. It's on Amazon.com. And it really was about personal transformation. I'm in the process of writing another book about what we're talking about here today. And I'm going to be, and it's called Moonshot Transformation, and how we move ahead. But I'm going to be looking at personal transformation. How do teams transform? And then how do institutions and organizations transform, because we talk about transformation a lot, but no one's ever really, in my opinion, within this space, really broken it down to say, okay, well, how do we really do that? Okay, so that's going to be all about the how. Almost done. So what does the future of learning look like? It looks like mass personalized learning, but it's one that celebrates the wonder, creativity, endless imagination, and the exponential human potential that's in each of us. That's what we're all about. This is my last slide. So I used to be an asset manager. I was a lawyer, and then I was an investment banker. And then, yes, I know I don't look old enough to have done all that, but I did. And then I moved to South Africa in the mid 90s, and I went there as a volunteer, and I never went back to Wall Street. So I am a former asset manager / Wall Street banker / attorney who then became an educator, because it was part of my way to give back. So I teach project finance, but I'm going to launch a new fund for future education. I'm going to start with $100 million to invest in people, talked about the human ingenuity, looking at strategies, looking at the right education technologies to enable transformation. It's broken. It's not reformation, it's transformation. And I'm going to bring all of the resources that I am able to muster to this future education fund. I'm putting it out there. We are recruiting people to get on board, whether you are a person who develops policy, whether you are an impact investor, get in here, educational thought leaders, and people who are creating new technologies that are going to continue to disrupt technology. We want to create a global fund that fosters connecting the connectors, and that is able to pour into those people who have great ideas that can scale, that can make lives better. And we grow this ecosystem that is really forward looking. Future education, futureedfund.com. Take a picture. There it is. Send us an email, and that's my pitch.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon, and you did very well bringing us out of the box and reminding us that we're not always that innovative. And Jose, thank you as well for joining the screen again. I thank both of you for your inspiring talks and for bringing ideas and initiatives forward so that we can start imagining the future of higher education. I think that right now we are all around the world in a position where we are held back by the constraints of the pandemic, but we also need, in spite of this time of crisis, to be able to think about the future that we want to create. And thank you to both of you for bringing some suggestions on the table. So before we take some questions, I'm just curious to see if you want to comment between. Do you have any comments, Jose, on Sharon's presentation? Any questions you want to put forward? And then afterwards, Sharon, you'll also get an opportunity to put forward a question for Jose, and then we will take some questions from the audience and from me as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sharon. No, I think we certainly agree about a lot, and I certainly think we agree that higher ed is broken, and that one of the ways it's broken is that it's inequitable and that it doesn't reach people. And so we do have to, I think, totally rethink it. A lot of those technologies and things that are happening, I see many of the same trends. One of the questions that I saw in the chat, which I do think is, the digital divide is certainly one that we're going to have to think about. And again, I think there are technological solutions, but again, governments and technologists are going to have to think about that. And I also think that we need to be in the game, as you said. So I want to worry about, totally personalized learning, which again, I also agree is largely the future. Is that we already have that in some ways, right? We have video games. We have a lot of other competition. As you said, there's other competition. There are other people challenging for those eyeballs. And so I think if we don't get in the game and create compelling products that will give people the skills and tools they want, they will just play video games all day long because they're more engaging. And it's on the same screen. So I actually think that's the competition. The competition is the screen and all of the other things. And so in that way, I think it's gotten harder to compete in that space, certainly in the kind of low tech ways that faculty think about. I don't know, I'll ask you if you think anything about that, but
Yeah. Can I jump in, Sri?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Listen, I don't disagree with you in that regard. I think the competition is coming from lots of places, but certainly right now we're in this two-dimensional space. And so, it's gone to zeros and ones and it's all about the screen. I don't think it's going to be all about the screen in the future. I think things like Neuralink are going to actually allow me to connect with what is in your brain in a way that's game changing. And so then what happens to me as an educator then? I mean, and we have, particularly in the developing world, people like Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey and others who want to come to places like Africa and developing Asia and sell us stuff. And so they're going to make sure that we've got access to the internet, right? We've got breakthroughs and things like the power wall where we're able to store sunlight better. So some of the big challenges that we have had in terms of how do you access technologies that are transformative have been hindered by inequality, right? So during this crisis, learning wasn't happening in every home at the same pace and in the same way. And that broke my heart. So I am in a situation where I live in a country where people don't even have access to electricity, right? Their parents are not computer literate. So the teacher comes up with all this great stuff to do, and they want to do stuff, but they don't even have access to the internet. And so what we're going to continue to see if we don't get in this game is the bifurcation of society, that Elysium type of world where it's no longer about your race or your gender. It's about your access to technology. And then those folks who don't have it are down here. And then those folks who don't, who do have it are up there living in the sky. And we talk about this like, oh yeah, that's such whatever, but it's happening and it's unfolding in front of us as we're speaking. There are hundreds of thousands of students in South Africa who are not learning. They're not in school, right? So I hear what you're saying. I believe, though, that we've got to deal with our own fear, our own technological anxiety, because the biggest roadblocks that we experience at the Center for Disruptive Tech, which is where we started this game with the University of Cape Town, saying, hey, come on, help us to be better within our own university. The people who were always blocking the conversations around something as basic as digital transformation were the educators themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And now what's happening? They're all online. So I can say, okay, I told you so. Tick that box. I don't have to have a conversation with you anymore about digital transformation. COVID-19 took care of that. What I'm saying now is that we're already disrupted. How do we build back better? The last thing I'll say is, Jose, I don't think we've got the solutions yet. And that's why, as opposed to digging into a solution, I have decided I'm going to create a fund to fund innovation around future learning, because I don't think that we can build a house in the middle of an earthquake.
Yeah, I think I hear from both of you. You mentioned the question of inequalities, and this is two sides of a coin with technology, because on one hand we have the digital divide. That's what you're both alluding to, the fact that we do not all have access to the means. Not all students have equal access to continue education in this period where we are moving to remote teaching and learning. But at the same time, technology is also a means that allows us to connect, to gain access to knowledge. That's what you're referring to as well, to democratize this access to knowledge. So we are somewhere in between, where we would like to have the access more equal, so that everybody have the same terms of possibilities to get access to this knowledge. This is what I hear from you. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy thing to solve. I think that ITU, the UN agency who is monitoring ICTs, they just came out with a report saying that you need 428, I think, billion US dollars in order to connect those who are not connected. So it's not something that is going to happen overnight. I mean, so of course it's not something that we can solve on the short term. So one thing is we have to build, of course, infrastructure that allows connectivity, and then once we have that, we have to think about how we then use it. Sharon, I wanted to ask a question to you, because you say that the system is broken, but how do we then start building the system differently? Is it at the policy level? Can we start at the institutional level? Or, I mean, it's probably a series of interventions, but how do we get this movement going in order to be able to offer mass personalized learning?
Thank you, Trina. I think that that's an excellent question. I don't want to go digging in my slides, but I have a really good visual on it, which some folks are asking for the presentation anyway. And so I'll make that available. Maybe I'll slip that slide in it, because I've mapped out the ecosystem of higher education, and I've pointed to the places in the ecosystem that I think are ripe for disruption and transformation. And please know that I am not a person who just is into disruption for the sake of disruption. Now, I want life to be better, and I want us to disrupt ourselves in ways that make sense in order for things to be better. Okay, so that disclaimer noted. I believe that at just about every point, whether you're talking about high-level policy, I also want to just invite those multilaterals and folks into this conversation. So I think at high-level policy levels, right down to what happens in the classroom. If you look at that entire value chain, at every place where those chains meet, the links meet, is an area that is outdated and ripe for disruption. So the answer to your question is the entire ecosystem needs an overhaul. I will end by saying, I think that these kinds of courageous conversations are incredibly important. I think having people who have different views and different things that they can bring to the party is critical. So I wanted to thank the IAU for bringing us together during these webinars and that kind of thing, because institutions are transformed by transformed people. And when you get a critical mass of people who have had a mindset change about something within an institution, then that institution changes. The other way that we can disrupt or help the ecosystem to transform is to identify the 16% of top influencers in the ecosystem. Who are they? And if you can move the 16%, and that's the same within even a company, right? So that the same principle applies in an ecosystem. If you can identify who are those 16%, who are they? That actually everyone else listens to, that have the intellectual and the other kinds of resources that make things happen, and you convince those 16%, you got it.
Thank you, Sharon. Jose, turning to you, I think that one of the things that you're weighing very much in your presentation as well is the role of the teachers. That it is changing the way that it's not about just passing on content. And I think Sharon was also making the same allusion. Does it mean that, is this change already taking place, or what do we need to do in order to move more towards this excited view that we saw in the picture on your slide, on somebody who is very curious and frustrated more or less to learn more?
Well, I think Sharon has made this point too, that right, the learner, learners now have opportunity to find things that are more engaging on their own. So back to digital divide, I'm not sure I want to trust Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg to do these things, and so we need to be in this space, right? Because when they bring internet to these, it's gonna for a profit. They're looking for something else, and so. We have to realize that right, again, video gamers didn't set out to do this, but there are more engaging opportunities. So if the learner has agency to pick whatever's important, some people will be able to say, oh, well, this is really going to be important for me. This is going to be hard and boring and calculus, but it will help my career, and they will slog through it. But other people will say, well, this is shiny and interesting, and right. I mean, that's how Facebook works, right? It's just it's like it's addictive. It was designed to be addictive. So we have to create addictive products that help people learn, that are as engaging. And so I do think, to Sharon's point, we have to create new partnerships, think about our products a new way. We can't just let big industry do it, because that's part of what's happening is that, right? Lots of companies are saying, companies like Shell Oil, like Google are saying, we don't, our, university graduates don't have the skills we want and it takes too long. So we'll offer a video game version of our curriculum that we think is important. And students who do this thing, go to Google University, literally, can then come work for us. And so, we really are already seeing the rise of this competition for the skills that you need to take jobs. So again, I think what's limited about that is that, right, Google, as soon as your skills grow old, will they invest in the next round of training that you need to stay relevant? And I'm not sure we can trust them to do that either. So I think we have, again, stackable credentials. We are 100% in sync. We need to create systems, and this is another way to totally revolutionize what we do. Instead of offering 4-year degrees, is think of what are the systems that I need to create to be able to provide you with the learning that you want and you need wherever it is along your journey. And so the idea of a lifelong degree, gym memberships sort of work this way. Right. Or a life insurance policy, right? An education insurance policy, right? You will be able to, so I think we should be charging a one-time, all the learning you can take. This is what Western Governors University, they do it by the semester, but they charge all you can learn fee. And then you can take as many courses and whatever you want it's a per 6-month fee. But why not a per lifetime fee? But Sharon and I agree that the system is broken. It's broken financially. And of course, the problem with transformation is that as long as it's sort of working, there's this incentive to kind of keep going. Well, I'm only 5 years away from retirement. It'll work for 5 more years. Don't bother me. And so, it may work for 5 more years for some places. I think Harvard's probably okay. But for 10 years and for 15 years, we really are at the point where we're starting to see students opt out. And those numbers about, right, student enrollment is down again in the US. It's been down multiple years in a row. We're coming to the American birth dearth hits in 2025. COVID. So I think this is absolutely the right time to start thinking about what are the other models for what we can do. But I think it starts by eliminating what we do is offer 4-year degrees that do right? And it starts with how do I empower learners to get what they need when they need it. And once I do that, I have to compete with the rest of social media and video games and the internet because that is the real competition.
And just following up on that, from your experience as being a president recently, were you able to install this spirit within the college that you were leading? Is it something that you can also foster from the leadership perspective? Or, I mean, it's a similar question to the one that I asked Sharon, where in the ecosystem, how do we get things moving? I mean, of course, it's a matter of it has to move at different levels, but
well, right now is the time. Again, for institutions that are financially in trouble, again, for American institutions, the prices they charge are obscene. And so as students just vote with their feet and say, we're no longer going to pay, there is an incentive. So the traditional response is, we just need new degrees, right? We need relevant degrees. So more computer science, more cybersecurity, which is a very short-term solution. Right. As I said, because the computer science degree, will help you with the first job. But if I don't also help you get the 6th or 7th job, then I'm really selling you short. And the other thing is that designing a degree takes time, getting it in place. They're out of date, right? We're not, universities move too slowly. I mean, a 4-year degree that takes us 3 years to design. Great. We're offering the iPhone 12 degree and it's 7 years from now. So the idea of simply saying, yes, we're going to teach content, but we don't know what content we're going to teach you when you come in 3 years because we don't know. And so being less content focused and more adaptable. And so part of that is shorter degrees, being more relevant, all of those sorts of things. But I do think it means changing fundamentally what it is that we think we do. And that's all the things on the list that Sharon, the majors, all of those things, who said semesters were important for learning? That's not written in any holy book, right? It should be whenever you want to start, you can start. And we're starting to see that again with the online And in this country, in America at least, what's interesting is that we've now passed the point where the for-profit controls the online, right? That we used to be that the for-profit companies had most of the online learners. And now it's the big state universities, the Arizona State University, Western, the not-for-profit. That's a good sign. But these are massive institutions that have tens of thousands of students at a lower cost. So that gives me a little hope.
Yeah. Maybe I think that you're referring a lot to we have to adapt to the learner, the learner at the center. Does it mean that students today need to know what they need to learn? I mean, do they have the capacity to actually make the path forward? I know some have, but do we have the masses on board if this is how we move forward, or they have to somehow be guided? Sharon, maybe you want to start, and Jose, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, and it certainly is something that I have been thinking about. Our Center for Disruptive Tech are partners with Campus Party, which is the largest tech and one of the largest tech and innovation movements on the planet. And there's a lot of gaming for good, so we can talk about that a little bit. But quite often when I am in these situations where we're dealing, say, with a social impact hackathon, et cetera, I'm a curator, I'm a guide, I am a learning facilitator, right? Here's a news flash, folks. Content is going to be free. It's already free, right? And we're going to continue to see pressure on content. So if we're in the content game, we got a problem. Right? We need to be in the platform game where we're building bridges that connect people and ideas and things and situations. And so I see one of the primary roles of professors, of educators going forward is using the wisdom, the real knowledge that we ourselves have gained, exemplifying the positions and the dispositions and the competencies to help to shape and guide. And I don't think you can get that. I agree with you, Jose. I'm not interested in leaving that to Elon Musk or to Mark Zuckerberg. But guess what? If we're not in the room and we leave the void, something is going to step into the space. And right now we've been like, whoa, 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 I want to keep doing it. And as a result, you leave this big space. And then Google, what's the #1 education company in the world today? Google, right? Okay, so we've got to get in here and we've got to bring our wisdom to these conversations. So I believe that the human ingenuity piece is imperative. And we are going to have to reimagine our role in learning. And I see that as guide and learning facilitator.
Jose, I will put the same question forward to you.
Yeah, we agree. I would add, my terminology, cognitive coach is my term for the same thing, but I think we agree about that. I think integration, right? So the future, this is true in the corporate world too, that you're either going to be the very best at something, have something unique that nobody else has, or you're going to be an aggregator or an integrator. And I think that universities have had this monopoly on knowledge for so long that we think what we do is provide knowledge and content. But now that there's all this other content, that's available easily. We don't have to provide content. People think, well, what am I going to do if it's not my physics lecture or well, yeah, you can get a Nobel Prize winner from Harvard or Stanford for free. Maybe they don't need you. So I think integrators is what we're going to do, right? We're connectors and integrators. So that students do need that piece of, okay, here's the content, but how did it change me? How does it connect with my other content? How is this thing that you keep, this critical thinking thing you keep talking about, how is that related to this? So that does mean giving up this role of professor, to Ali in Iraq, who said, it does mean that now, and again, maybe in Iraq, you don't have as much access to content in the right language, but at some point there is going to be free content in the right languages for everybody. And so in the future, the role of the teacher, again, is to help students integrate and think about what they've learned and put those pieces together, and not to be a content provider. We needed that in the past, in the same reason that we needed lots and lots of gas stations, right? You needed the gas near where the car was. But now that it's electric, right? If everybody has you don't, right, you're going to not need that. So if you need to distribute food and groceries or gas, yes, but knowledge can be distributed on the internet. And so we don't need to have local people distributing knowledge, but we do need local teachers to build community, to build resilience, to help integrate. But that set of skills, the process skills have just are going to be more and more important.
Yep. Trine, before we sign off, I just wanted to address something that Ali had mentioned. He talked about specific solutions in Iraq. And I just wanted to say, for those of you who are just like, okay, this is a general conversation and not specific enough to my region. I take that and that would be fair, because it is actually impossible to have a conversation, a meaningful conversation that is going to be sharp enough to actually be something that you can implement in that situation, in that solution. And that is one of the reasons why I think a kind of a global platform connecting the connectors with not just money, but access to human capital, so that we can begin to share more information and ideas. Because I guarantee you, Ali, whatever it is that you're dealing with in Iraq, someone else is dealing with it somewhere else. And because of the silos, right, we aren't able to build the bridges that allow you to say, okay, this is what's happening in Syria. This is what's happening, in the township in Cape Town, where there's no running water and there's no electricity. And what are we doing there? And so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time funding game-changing ideators and people who are doing stuff in some of the most difficult regions on Earth. And what we're looking for are solutions that have the capacity to scale in those regions. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if there's anything that I can do to help to move the conversation along in your particular region, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Sharon, to pick up on that as well. I wanted to ask one final question before we round off, and then you will get a possibility for a final comment as well. It is just to follow your logic in terms of trying to do this student-centered learning. What is your take then on academic disciplines? Will they stay in place because we need the specialization, or is it also something where you can move as a learner between different disciplines and create your own path? Jose, you want to start by this question?
So, there's always this conversation about, well, you have to know your discipline first to be interdisciplinary, et cetera. There's some truth to that, but I do think that it's the integration of the disciplines that is the problem. That people, once and think about the word discipline, right? The reason discipline is the limitation of thinking, right? It's I'm going to ask these questions, right? It's rules. And that's very useful to say, well, I want to create a vaccine. I'm going to do this, then I have to do that, right? To have whatever. There are all sorts of reasons to have it. But we have to recognize that that discipline is also inherently limiting. And so I think that as we create new areas of research, new types of knowledge, again, most of what students are going to learn, we can't teach them. We don't know what it is. It's in the future. There are going to be all sorts of new things. And so I think if we accept that and say, but the process of how you change your mind is going to stay the same, right? The process of how you get good advice, of how you get people who will question what you know, that stays the same. And so that's where the relevance comes in. And back to what Sharon said about Ali, that there's always going to be the need for local examples, right? So calculus may be the same everywhere in the world, but I am going to learn better calculus if the examples that you use are Juan and Jose. And when I went to school, it was always Steve and Joe, right? That's just changing names. But the point is that that's always, right? Relevance is about local, and it's always going to be local.
Sharon, what about you and academic disciplines? You have the same view as Jose, that it's something that we can also break down somehow in towards the future.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan and when they asked me to teach the MBAs, I said no. No offense to the MBAs on the call. I was like, I'm not sure that's relevant. But when they asked me to teach, my students are getting a master's degree in development finance. And I said, whoa, development finance. And then they allowed me to design my own course. And it was interdisciplinary, right? So I draw on law and policy and finance, and I'm using engineering tools. I mean, so when we begin to talk about how do you model complexity in the system, we've talked about this VUCA world that we're living in. My students are using engineering tools, inputs and outputs and flows and stocks and streams to get their mind around how do you model the externalities, both positive and negative, that are related to a project. So you want to build a dam. How many people are going to be displaced? How many jobs you're going to create? What's the impact on tour, et cetera? It's complex. And those are skills that they can go out and use in all kinds of wild and wonderful ways. And then sometimes they say, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to start my own new fun, great things. And so they're doing incredible things, but I live interdisciplinary. And I believe that we're going to continue to see more fluidity. So these old ideas, like Josette said, this is what I'm going to teach. This is my fiefdom. Don't come over here. It's ridiculous. Open-walled, socially embedded, contextualized, relevant, learner at the center.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Jose, any last comment from you as well before we close off the
Yeah, so I'm going to. Vladimir has asked an interesting question, and so the truth is, I think you're right that if we don't change, what you talk about is what's. In fact, I would argue it's already happening. Right. That's what's happening with Facebook and social media and video. Right. That people are being enslaved by these technologies. That's why they study less, because those technologies are more interesting and more vital. And then I'm going to give you a paper handout to say, here, fill out these math problems. So I think we have to partner, but we have to recognize that we are already competing in that space. And so local institutions have to realize that the internet is the real competition. And so we can't stop that train. We have to figure out how we're going to play in that space.
Thank you very much. Sharon, a last comment from you?
Yeah. I'd also like to just pick up on Vladimir's point, and it grieves me, Vladimir, and I have sleepless nights about it, which is why I decided I was going to start a new fund. Being a fund manager and raising capital is a slog. Who wants to do that? But I'm going to do it because part of what we want to invest in is upskilling. We want to invest in people, so that they're not unemployed, so that local institutions are not destroyed. And I made that point when I said, I'm not here just as an advocate of disruption for the sake of disruption, because when you disrupt industries, there are casualties. But here's the news flash. We're on this, two-dimensional device. And so even webinars, are a new form of learning, right? We didn't have, you went to a seminar and then we said, oh, we can get on the World Wide Web. Then we could do a webinar. And so I think that the kind of changes that we're talking about within education as an industry, because let's be clear, it's a business in many cases. Private institutions are very wealthy. They make a lot of money, right? It's not just philanthropy. And when institutions don't evolve because the people within them don't evolve, well, then they become extinct. So we've got an opportunity to fast forward our own evolution. And I strongly believe that if we don't evolve, we will die.
Thank you very much. I think that this is it for us. We're going to close this webinar, and I will thank heartfully our two presenters, Jose and Sharon, for sharing their views, for making their inspiring presentations, to showing that there are different ways of moving forward. And I think that you have brought a lot of energy and motivation to this session. So I really thank you for participating. Thank you for the audience from different countries, a very broad range of countries. And I think this is what we are doing at the IAU. We are not bringing in one way of doing things, but what we are doing is that we are bringing together the voices from different regions and different countries of the world to listen. As you were saying, Sharon, we need to connect, and this is what we try to do here at the IAU. So final word is just remember to sign up for the next sessions. Next week, we are going to look at our higher education ready to train the future healthcare workforce. And after that, we will focus on international collaboration and academic partnerships. So please do continue to take part in the discussion. Thank you to the speakers, and I hope that we will continue the conversation beyond this webinar. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.